listen for a brand new show. Scooby Doo is here again, away we go.
Scooby Doo is running from a spooky ghost.
Shaggy isn't doing what he does the most. Hey, come on, get involved till the mystery is solved.
Hang around for Scooby Doo.
Hey, come on, get involved till the mystery is solved.
Hang around for Scooby Doo. That's my pal. Scooby Dooby Doo.
Hello, Scooby Doo fans! Welcome to my Season 1 Episode 16 review of The Scooby Doo Show. So last time I continued my reviews of The Scooby Doo Show with a review of Season 1 Episode 15 of The Scooby Doo Show. I hope you guys enjoyed that. But of course today, I'll be covering Season 1 Episode 16 of The Scooby Doo Show, titled The Spirits of 76, which was released on December 18th, 1976. The short synopsis of the episode is, in Washington, D.C., the gang get locked up in the Smithsonian Institute for the night. This institute is chock full of antiques, inventions, and the ghosts of Benedict Arnold, William Demont, and Major Andre. So as per usual, I'll be watching Season 1 Episode 16 of the Scooby Doo Show on the Scooby Doo Dynamite Hour, the complete series DVD. This DVD has every episode of Season 1 of the Scooby Doo Show, as well as every episode of Dynamite. Unfortunately, this is the only physical media release of Season 1 of the Scooby Doo Show, so if you want any sort of DVD or physical copy of Season 1 of the Scooby Doo Show, this is your only option. But if you're a big fan of Dynamite as well, then this is a nice added bonus for you. Now, as far as this episode's reception is concerned, I'm not really sure how fans feel about this particular episode. The Scooby Doo community doesn't really talk about this episode, and I don't really know whether it serves as a good conclusion to Season 1 of the Scooby Doo Show, or if it's a bad conclusion to Season 1. So there's really only way to find out how Season 1 ends, on a high note, a low note, or an average note. Well, let's find out. So let's take a look at the episode to see whether I think it is a good or bad episode of the Scooby Doo Show. The episode begins with the gang visiting Washington, D.C., but they get caught in a rainstorm. Shaggy suggests staying at the Smithsonian Institute, which impresses Velma for having an idea that doesn't involve food. Upon arriving, they are unknowingly being watched by a ghost. Inside, the gang find many models, though the museum is devoid of people. A security guard walks by, explaining that the place is haunted by ghosts. As he leaves, the guard warns them that it's nearly closing time. Noticing that the guard's shoes are squeaky and wet, Fred tells the others to keep their eyes open. Shaggy sees a tableau of traitors of American history with wax dummies of Benedict Arnold, William Demont, and Major Andre. As everyone except Scooby moves away from the dummies, Scooby sniffs William's dummy, but is shoved away. Startled, Scooby hides under a giant locomotive that the gang examines. Suddenly, one of the dummies turns on the locomotive, making a lot of loud noise. Scooby falls through a trapdoor under the train and lands in a cotton gin that also turns on. The gang starts looking for Scooby, asking another guard, Mr. Clive, to help, though he also tells them that it's nearly closing time. As they leave, the dummies listen to the whole conversation. After meeting back at the still operational locomotive, Fred finally turns it off and they hear Scooby giving out weak yelps. They find the trapdoor and Scooby tangled in the cotton gin's belt and proceed to help him out. But for some odd reason, the entire gang decide to go through the trapdoor, when really only Fred and Shaggy should have gone down there, because those two could have helped Scooby out of there, and they wouldn't have been locked inside in the museum. But then, of course, the plot of the episode couldn't progress, so it's a cheap cop-out to keep the episode going, but I still think it's pretty stupid that the entire gang went down rather than just Fred and Shaggy. And so, because of that, Mr. Clive and Mr. Grumper assume the gang has already left and started the time lock. After getting Scooby out, they examine the cotton gin and look for a way out. They find extra dummies for the wax figures upstairs, then the ghost of Benedict Arnold seals them in. Daphne explains that the real Benedict Arnold was a traitor who was going to surrender West Point to the Redcoats in 1780, therefore Benedict Arnold has been dead for almost 200 years. The gang decide to split up and find another way out. Fred and the girls find web footprints like the ones Mr. Grumper left behind, and they follow them to a dead end and see one going right through the wall. They suddenly see the ghost of Benedict Arnold and Major Andre and flee. Scooby takes the dinosaur bone, causing the skeleton to collapse, and is chased by the ghost of William Demont. They end up crashing, sending the three ghosts away and running into the others. They go back upstairs and run into Mr. Clive, who informs them that the museum is closed using a time lock that won't open until noon. They hear the locomotive start again, and Mr. Grumper says that it's been turning on by itself every time the engineer fixes it, and Scooby backs into a wall, causing a bearskin to fall onto him. Once the train stops, he accidentally scares the engineer, Mr. Willett, until Velma removes the bearskin. Willett explains that he sleeps in the museum and must fix the train every time it starts. As he goes, the gang sees that he also leaves wet footprints and heads back to the museum. They search the basement where they find the old cotton gin, which turns on. They can also hear the automated train starting upstairs at the same time, and Velma inspects the cotton gin and notices several of its parts are newer than the rest. They follow the belts of the cotton gin as well as the wet footprints to the end of the wall. Scooby pulls a lever that flips a hidden switch located on a suit of armor, allowing the wall to turn. The gang follows a flooded cavern to a concrete wall with a huge hole drilled in it by a machine. They discover huge bags of money there, and on the other side of the wall there are dozens of printing presses. The gang catches the three ghosts after Scooby traps them with one of the antique planes.
Yipe! I think I hear a familiar sound that I wish I didn't think I heard.
Shh! Someone's coming! Quick, duck behind this press.
The glow coats are coming!
Jinkies, I hope this heap doesn't run out of gas.
You mean steam?
Yikes! They're gaining on a Scoob!
Master! Master!
Look out! Bunker Hill dead ahead!
Oh my gosh! They forgot to put brakes on this jalopy!
Yipe! Someone's shooting whole cannons at us! Hold tight, Scoob! Yipe! The steering's gone! Yipe and double yipe! Oop! I thought they outlawed fireworks! Yipe! Yipe, yipe! And triple yipe! General Washington, I hope you don't mind if I borrow one of your ice cubes. The slippery ice ought to put him into a super skid. Glass ice! I muffed it again!
We ran out of gas. I mean steam.
As Shaggy would say, yipe! Look!
Oh my gosh, Scooby's flying and he doesn't even have a pilot's license.
Scooby-Doo!
They unmask the ghost of Major Andre as an unnamed accomplice. Then they unmask the ghost of Linda Mott as Mr. Willett, the city engineer. And finally, Shaggy addresses the ghost to Benedict Arnold as Grumpy Old Grumper and believes that it's him and tells him that the jig is up. However, when he unmasks the ghost, it turns out not to be Grumper, but the cheery Mr. Clive. A government agent shows up to arrest them, and the gang explains that they put the real wax dummies in the basement, and when the honest guards made their rounds, they thought the museum was empty, giving them the chance to stay inside all night and work on the drill. They were trying to dig through the wall in the museum to reach the money inside. They used the cotton gin to power the drill, and the locomotive was just there to cover the noise so no one would notice. Mr. Willett confesses that he stumbled on the old plans for the abandoned storm drain running to the mint in some dusty old files and devised a scheme to rob the mint. Mr. Grumper reveals that his feet were always wet due to always mopping up the wet footprints and puddles that the ghost made. Shaggy holds one of the bills, which he thought was worth 200 hamburgers. However, the agent explains that all the ghost's efforts were in vain because the money is worthless without the treasurer's signature, the treasury seal, and the serial numbers printed on them. And the episode ends with Scooby immediately eating the incomplete bill, and Shaggy and Scooby-Doo laugh at this. I'm going to give Season 1, Episode 16 of the Scooby Doo Show 2 stars out of 5. Yeah, this wasn't a great episode. This was a pretty poor finale to Season 1. Season 1 did not end the best of ways. It's tiny bit better than the previous episode, but that's not saying much. Like, it's almost on par with the last episode, and yeah, the last 3 episodes of the season really made the season end on a weaker note. And Season 1 just, this was just a poor Season 1 finale and not the best way to end Season 1. Not a great episode in my eyes. But before I get into my thoughts on why I don't really like this episode and get into my negatives, I'll first go over the positives for the episode and what I did actually like about the episode. So starting with the positives, my first one is that I think Shaggy and Scooby were their usual funny selves in this episode. They weren't too cowardly in this episode, at least not in my eyes. Like, they had 1 or 2 scenes of being cowardly, but for the most part, they were quite humorous. And I did like that they helped capture the villains at the end. Not one of Shaggy and Scooby's, stronger outings, but it was good enough, and I was happy enough with it. They had a couple funny moments, and they did help capture the villains at the end. So I felt like out of all the gang members, Shaggy and Scooby were at least passable in this episode. I thought there were a good number of suspects in this episode. So you had 3 suspects in the episode, all equally suspicious. You had Mr. Willett, the city engineer. You had Mr. Clive, the cheery night guard, the cheery night watchman. And you had Mr. Grumper, the grumpy night watchman. All of them were equally suspicious, and they did fulfill the bare minimum requirement. We had three costume villains, so they at least fulfilled the bare minimum. Maybe another suspect or 2 would have been good, but I feel like all of them were equally suspicious, and they did a good job, with the suspects in this episode. Definitely made Mr. Grumper very much a red herring. Like, they gave a lot of information about him. He was very, the wet footprints kind of made him seem very, very suspicious. So, like, there were a lot of signs pointing toward it where the episode was trying to really try to point you in the direction of Mr. Grumper. But obviously, if you know Scooby-Doo and familiar with past shows, you know that usually you don't follow the red herring or who you think the episode's trying to point you to until you get substantial clues that tell you otherwise. But yeah, the suspects were good in this episode. We had 3, and they fulfilled the bare minimum, and they were all equally suspicious, so I was happy with that. Maybe another suspect or 2 would have been nice, but as is, they at least fulfilled the bare minimum. And my final positive is that I found the setting of the episode to be really good. So, of course, the main setting of the episode was the Smithsonian Institute, which is a play on the Smithsonian Institute, which is cool. And I also like that we got to see some establishing shots of Washington, D.C. I really like that. This episode did a good job, making you feel like you're in Washington, D.C. Even though, you got the Smithsonian Institute, which is a play on the Smithsonian Institute. And, we see all the famous Washington, D.C. landmarks, like the Capitol building. And, they talk about the Lincoln Memorial building, so I felt like this episode did a good job of making you feel like you were in Washington, D.C., especially with the villains and the setting of the episode. It's kind of similar to a museum, but unlike previous Scooby-Doo episodes, this episode does a good job of making the setting feel unique and distinct. It doesn't feel like it's trying to copy something that it did before. Yes, we've had some situations where we've been into, like, museum type of areas, look no further than One a Night for a Night. But I feel like this is different. Like, this feels like a Washington, D.C. museum. This feels like we're in Washington, D.C. itself. We feel like we're in the capital of the United States. Like, it's really cool. And I felt the setting did a good job conveying, the main, the vibe that the episode was going for, which was the Washington, D.C. vibe. So yeah, I really liked the setting of the episode. It felt unique, it felt distinct, and I liked the play on the Smithsonian Institute. But that's all I got for positives, so I think it's about time we get on to the negatives for the episode and what I really didn't like about the episode. So starting with the negatives, I think the first one that I have to address is that I think Fred, Daphne, Velma were all weak in this episode, which is something that I said in the last episode, but it's true for this episode too. They weren't great here either, and this was not a great way to end season 1 for them, I'll say that. Fred wasn't really much of a leader in this episode. He didn't really do any sort of leadership, at least not in my eyes. He didn't really piece together the clues to help solve the mystery, and he did not set up a trap in this episode. So unlike in the last episode where he had a potential moment of setting up a trap for a villain, this episode he doesn't have that. Instead Shaggy and Scooby trap them on the fly. Daphne doesn't really do anything noteworthy either, and Velma is not really much of a leader or, piecing together the clues to help solve the mystery either. So yeah, not a great final outing for the gang for the first season of the Scooby Doo Show. But yeah, they just did not fulfill their basic roles, and they didn't do anything noteworthy, so I found Fred, Daphne, and Velma to be very weak in this episode. Then we have the villains of the episode, who I thought were very weak in all honesty. So the main villains of the episode were, of course, Ghost of Benedict Arnold, William DeMont, and Major Andre, or the Spirits of 76, which is what I like to refer them as. It's an easier way of saying their names, and Shaggy even drops that the title of the episode in the episode. So I feel like, I'm just going to call them the Spirits of 76 rather than their individual names. I didn't find the Spirits of 76 to be that interesting. They were not scary in the slightest. Despite them fitting the setting well, I don't think they were particularly scary. I don't think they were fun or entertaining to watch. I found them quite boring and very bland, and yeah, they're kind of unique, but not in a good way. Like, they just were very uninteresting villains. Not a very well thought out kind of villain. So all the Spirits of 76, to me, they were neither scary nor fun or entertaining. They were just very bland and boring villains to watch, and I didn't really find any enjoyment out of them, both scare-wise and, entertainment factor-wise. Outside of costume, I found all three men to be very uninteresting. So, obviously, you have Mr. Clive, who was the cheery night watchman. You had Mr. Willett, the city engineer, and you have an unnamed accomplice that we never see before. I don't need to explain the unnamed accomplice. We didn't see this guy beforehand. We don't know his name. We don't know who the fuck he is. So, that settles that. Mr. Willett, the city engineer, we see him once, and he doesn't get that much screen time, and we don't know much about him. And he doesn't make much of an impression. So I'm not really big on him. Mr. Clive is the only one that I could see an argument for. However, I don't think he did enough for me to warrant him to be particularly good in this episode. Because he was doing more backstory for Grumper rather than the villains. And Grumper had a lot of backstory and was, giving the exposition about the villains. So had Grumper actually been one of the villains, I probably would have liked that, because then he was a significant character outside of costume and he did a lot. Mr. Clive, however, I don't think he really did much. He just was, this cheery night watchman who seemed to be a nice, kindly, friendly fellow, but it turns out he just ends up being one of the villains. So none of the three men stood out. None of them were interesting. They didn't really do much. They didn't really have much of a story. They didn't really provide any backstory for the villains. So yeah, all three men outside of costume, very uninteresting. I found the motive of the episode to be very weak and poorly thought out. So the motive for the villains in this episode, the Spirits of 76's motive is that they wanted to scare everyone away so that they could steal money from the mint. But, as the government agent establishes at the end of the episode, all of that work was completely pointless. They didn't have the treasury seal or treasurer's signature or the serial numbers, so it was a stupid, poorly thought out plan. These men clearly had no idea what they were doing. They just probably thought like, we could just steal the money like everything's on it. Well, they were dead wrong for one thing. So it was a poorly thought out motive because they clearly didn't take the steps necessary to, go a step further and try to actually get those elements. I would have actually given them credit had they had, like, maybe a treasurer, who could be in on the deal, who could, have a, that could have who could do the treasury seal and signature and have the serial numbers and be able to fake it in some way to where they could steal the money that way. Had they gotten a treasurer involved, it probably would have been cool, and maybe the son-named accomplice was a treasurer, but I don't think he was, because we don't know jack shit about him. So it just ends up being a poorly thought out motive, because they clearly didn't do their research into how, money is printed and how it's, how the government, gets it out there, and the steps they take to make sure it's authenticated money. So yeah, it just ends up being a bland money motive, and maybe had they taken the steps to get, like, a treasurer involved in the scheme, that could have been really interesting and maybe added a layer to it, because that could have made, add some uniqueness to this money motive and make it really stand out, have some flavor to it. Instead, they just kind of thought that, because they stumbled upon plans that had a sewer drain that went from or a storm drain that went from the Institute to the Mint, that they could just steal the money without having the need to do anything else, when in fact they were wrong. So yeah, very weak, poorly thought out money motive. Definitely didn't take the steps they needed to. If they had, I would have given them credit, and I would have really loved this motive. But they didn't, so I'm going to have to say this motive was very weak and very poorly thought out. There wasn't really a mystery in this episode. We're not really asking why the ghosts are haunting the Smithsonian Institute, because it's Washington, D.C. This is the historic capital of the United States. Of course, there's going to be ghosts in Washington, D.C. It's a historic landmark that has had many historical events and many historical figures, that's bound to have ghosts in it. So it doesn't surprise me that there would be, ghost in, a place like the Smithsonian Institute. So I'm not really asking that question, and there's really no other questions I'm asking. So there really wasn't much of a mystery in this episode. It really was just the gang just unfortunately had nothing better to do, and we're locked in the Institute, so they're just like, well, we're locked in here, so we might as well just see what's going on, because we have nothing better to do. We can't get out of here. We can't, go back to the hotel or anything. And they couldn't, so, it just kind of felt, it was kind of like one of those episodes where the gang really weren't, actively trying to solve a mystery. They just had nothing better to do and couldn't go anywhere else. There weren't really any clues in the episode. You could argue, like, the locomotive as maybe a possible clue, or, the cotton gin, or, the wet footprints, or the drill, or, the rotating wall. To me, I don't consider those clues, because clues are really something that point towards, a suspect or a motive, something that, the gang stumbled upon that wasn't meant to be found. And I know these things weren't meant to be found, but they're more just contraptions and stuff that the villains are using, and I don't really think any of them were really clues. I just think they were indications that these ghosts were not real ghosts, which of course we already know. Like, we're used to this by now. Like, we accept that. This is the Scooby Doo formula. We know that this is the case. So I don't need that confirmation, because I know the villains are going to be fake. The clues should be pointing towards who is the villain behind the costume. It should either be narrowing down the suspects list, or it should be pointing towards what the possible motive for the villains could be. And I don't think anything the gang stumble upon would be considered clues or do any of that stuff. So to me, there wasn't really any clues that the gang found in this episode that pointed towards a suspect or a motive or anything at all. It was just contraptions of how the villains were doing their scheme, but it wasn't pointing towards the scheme itself or who potentially could be the man behind the costume. And my final negative is that I found the atmosphere of the episode to be very weak, in all honesty. So there was no tension or suspense or creepiness or eeriness. Wasn't fearing for the gang's safety. Wasn't on the edge of my seat wondering what was going to happen next. Nothing the villains or the setting did was very creepy or eerie. They tried to establish some type of creep factor with the dark, rainy, day or night, I don't know what you call it, atmosphere, because it was raining and dark, but realistically it could have been during the day or at night. I don't think the gang specify what time of the day it is. I'm assuming it is night. But either way, they're trying to establish a rainy, dark atmosphere. That's cool and all, but they don't really do much beyond that to really help, invigorate that atmosphere, to make us feel like it's very creepy and eerie in the Smithsonian Institute, or the villains being very creepy or eerie, or, providing tension or suspense because we're wondering, we're fearing for the gang's safety or wondering what's going to happen next. Like, I don't feel any sort of, feeling, I felt no tension or suspense or creepiness or eeriness at all in this episode. So yeah, there was no atmosphere to speak of at all in this episode. Overall, guys, I would personally not recommend this episode to fans and newcomers of the show. This isn't a great episode. This is a weak Season 1 finale and is about on par with the previous episode in terms of quality. So it's not that great of a finale for Season 1. It's a very poor, weak finale to the first season of the Scooby Doo Show. And it's just not one of the better episodes in my eyes. It's a tiny bit better than the last episode, but that's not saying much, And the season overall just did not end on a good note. So yeah, not a good way to end Season 1. But we'll see how Season 2, kicks off. But as far as the Season 1 finale goes, this was a very poor finish to the first season of the Scooby Doo Show, and not one of the better episodes in my opinion. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Please give a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the episode. Do you like this episode? Do you think I'm being too harsh on it? Are there things that you see that I don't see? Do you think this is a good Season 1 finale to the Scooby Doo Show? I'd be interested to hear that. Do you hate this episode? I'd be interested in that as well. Are you on par with me? Like, do you think this is a pretty bad finale to the first season of the Scooby Doo Show? Do you agree with me that, it's, a weak and poor Season 1 finale, but it's a tiny bit better than the previous episode? Or are you somewhere in the middle where you just think it's average and it's okay and decent, but it's not good or bad? I'm curious for your thoughts. Let me know. And subscribe for more Scooby Doo content like this, or if you're just interested in any of my other content. Obviously, I'll have more Scooby Doo content on the way, such as TV show episode reviews, movie reviews, video game reviews and Let's Plays, and book reviews. You name it, we're covering all things Scooby on this channel. So if you're a diehard Scooby Doo fan like me, and you love all things Scooby Doo and want to talk all things Scooby Doo, stuff that isn't talked about much, or if you're a newcomer who needs help and, or in guidance on what areas of the franchise, you think you should tackle or what you might be interested in, hopefully these reviews will help, and hopefully people in the comments or my audience members can help you out with that. But yeah, if you love all things Scooby, come join the channel, experience some amazing Scooby Doo content. Let's have a blast. Let's talk about our favorite Mystery Inc. gang and talk about why they're the best. In my next video, I'll continue my reviews of the Scooby Doo Show with a review of Season 2, Episode 1 of the Scooby Doo Show, titled The Curse of the Viking Lake, the first episode of Season 2. This will be very interesting to talk about and move on to Season 2 of the Scooby Doo Show and see if Season 2 gets out on a good note. I don't remember how good Curse of the Viking Lake is. I haven't seen it in a while. So hopefully it'll be a good start to Season 2. I don't hear many people talk about it, and I haven't seen it in quite a while. So fingers crossed that it'll be a good start to Season 2. We can only hope. But yeah, if you want to know my thoughts on Season 2, Episode 1, The Curse of the Viking Lake, then come join me next time. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, peace out.
We got it all together for a brand new show. Scooby Doo is here again, away we go. Scooby Doo!